Disposable bottled water is everywhere, but which bottled water is the best? Influencers like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson lead you to believe that their bottled water is the best, but is it? Are you putting your family's health at risk by drinking bottled water? Check this out. Hi, I'm Gary the Water Guy, and I simplify water filtration to help you conquer crappy water for your family. You know, if you're like 43% of all families surveyed that drink bottled water because they don't trust or don't like the taste of their tap water, you need to choose the best bottled water for your family. But there must be some way of cutting through all the marketing hype to find the right one. Well, there sure is. And by the end of this video, you'll have all the information you need to choose the right bottled water for your family. We all know about the environmental impact of the leftover plastic water bottles, but stick around to the end of this video where I'll share with you the huge environmental impact caused by bottled water that nobody talks about. During this video, I'm going to share with you the test results and explain the differences between a dozen or so popular brands of bottled water that celebrities like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Nicole Kidman, and other celebrities are promoting to be the best choice for your family. And along the way, I'll also explain to you the different water types that are out there, including distilled water, spring water, reverse osmosis water, and we'll even compare them to tap water and rainwater. And I'll share with you how these bottled water brands differentiate themselves from each other. When you look at all the bottled water options that are available on the store shelves and you really look at the labels, you see it seems that they really differentiate themselves more about lifestyle as opposed to what's actually in the bottles. But what has that got to do with the water that's in the bottles that you actually drink? So we measure the quality of water in a number of different ways. So the most telling is TDS, total dissolved solids, and we measure that in parts per million. So that's the total of all the mineral content that's in water. So water that has zero mineral content, like distilled water, for example, has 0 parts per million of TDS or total dissolved solids. As there's more minerals in the water, the TDS goes higher and higher. Water is a natural solvent, so what happens, it dissolves whatever comes into contact with, and that's how that increases the mineral content. So the longer that water is in the ground, in an area where there's limestone or something like that, the more of those minerals it accumulates inside the water, and the TDS goes up, and the less pure the water becomes. And we measure TDS with a TDS meter. Now, according to the EPA, drinking water standard for total dissolved solids is 500 parts per million or less. And we use the TDS meter just like this one to measure the TDS of the bottled water we're talking about here today. And if you'd like to test the TDS of your water, I've got a great YouTube video that shows you how. I'll put a link in the description down below. We also tested the pH of the water. So pH, it tells us if the water is neutral, acidic, or alkaline, which is the opposite of acidic. So 7.0 is neutral or basic. Anything below that is acidic. Anything above that is alkaline. We also measured the hardness of the water. That's the amount of calcium and magnesium that's in the water that leaves scale deposits behind whenever water touches a surface. We used our water test kit to measure both the pH and the hardness of the water. So on this pyramid chart, you can see the relative differences in hard water compared to soft water. So for example, you can see that softened water has 8 parts per million or less. Soft water is between 17 and 63 parts per million. That's water that's just naturally soft. Moderately hard water is 60 to 119 parts per million. Hard water 119 to 179. Then we get to very hard water. Well, none of the waters we tested here, the bottled water, came into that range. So there's a lot of great information on these itty bitty labels on the back of these water bottles, but you need to first of all be able to see them, and secondly need to be able to decipher the information that's on there to find out how useful that information is to you when making a choice of this bottled water for your family. So the first piece of information you should really look at is what type of water is. So on this one here, it says natural spring water. So this is what those symbols on the ingredient labels on the bottle actually tell us. So Na is sodium, As is arsenic, ACO3 is bicarbonate, Ca is calcium, N nitrogen, Pb is lead. Hopefully we don't have any lead in any of these waters. K is potassium. And then we can go on to see that SiO2 is silicon, Cl is chlorine, or chlorides, Cu is copper, Mg is magnesium, F is fluoride, SO4 is sulfates, Zn is zinc, and NO3 are nitrates. To get a baseline for comparison purposes, I'm going to compare bottled water to tap water, rainwater, and lake water. Why rain and lake water? Well, I don't know about you, but I believe mankind, bees, birds, trees, everything was put on this planet with the intention of consuming water from lakes or from rainwater or that kind of natural water source. I don't believe we were really meant to drill holes 200 feet down in the ground and suck out water from wells, and that was our intended water to drink. The most likely drinking water sources for us before they became polluted were lakes, rivers, and rainwater. So as you can see here, the pH of city water or municipal water is around 7, river or lake water is 6.2, and rainwater is 5.5. Now these are kind of averages. There's always going to be some give and take with different areas, but TDS, for example, 300 parts per million municipal water, again, it's about average. River or lake water is quite a bit lower, around 127, and rainwater is much lower, about 11. Hardness in parts per million, 136 parts per million. That's kind of average municipal water. River or lake water is around 80, and rainwater is very low at 5. And the cost, well, of course, municipal water, there is some cost, not a very high cost, but rain and lake water, well, it's free. Now, many of the bottles of water we're talking about here today are spring water. So what's spring water? Well, it comes from a spring underneath the ground. There's also artesian spring water. Again, is forced from an underground aquifer that forces the water up under pressure and forces it up to the surface, or at least above the top of the aquifer for that artesian spring water. Now, there's no health or chemical or any kind of benefits to artesian spring water over regular spring water. So for spring water to be able to be called spring water, they can't process the water, they can't do anything else with it other than run it through a carbon filter and an ultraviolet light to make sure it's bacteria free before it gets bottled. All right, first up we've got Fiji. So Fiji water comes from, you guessed it, from Fiji. You know, where Survivor is filmed. Anyway, it's natural spring water, tells us that right here on the label, and it actually even tells you what island or what area of Fiji that this water comes from. So again, because it's spring water, it's processed, it runs through a carbon filter, also runs it through a ultraviolet disinfection system to make sure it's safe and bacteria free when it gets bottled into these bottles. And the website tells us that it's tested regularly from hundreds of organic and inorganic chemicals. We tested Fiji water with a pH of 7.7, so it is alkaline water. It also showed us a hardness of 85 parts per million, which is quite hard. It's going to clog your Keurig. And the total dissolved solids came in at 131 parts per million, which again for bottled water is quite high. Fiji water gets high praises from actor Nicole Kidman, who endorses them for being a green company. But when we look at the label, you can see that there's a lot of stuff in this water. So first of all, there's potassium, 5 parts per million, calcium, 18 parts per million, fluoride, 0.24 parts per million. That's unusual to find that in bottled water. Chloride's 10 parts per million, and sodium 18 parts per million. That's a lot of sodium. Just to give you some idea, sodium reduced diet is 20 parts per million or less. So you can see at 18 parts per million, this is super high in sodium. One of the reasons the water probably tastes quite good. Again, you add salt to food to make it taste better. Well, the same scenario with this. So lead, of course, there's 0, and that's great. Silica 93, copper 0, zinc, pH is 7.7, which is very close to what we tested it at. Bicarbonates 154, magnesium 15, nitrates 0.3, sulfates 2, and 0 arsenic. But my problem with this bottled water, and pretty much the same problem with most bottled water, is the amount of time that the water sits in those bottles. Like for example, it's bottled in Fiji, we know that, and then it gets, I assume, goes to a warehouse there, and then from a warehouse it goes to a coast, and then from a coast it goes onto a container ship, and then that container ship goes across the ocean, and then it comes to North America, where again it gets loaded onto a truck and it gets delivered to, I assume, Fiji's warehouse in North America, and then from there it goes to a warehouse of a grocery store, and then from there it goes to the You see where I'm getting at? It's a long time between where the water enters the bottle and where it enters your mouth and gets used up. Remember, water's a natural solvent. It dissolves what it comes into contact with, so it's sitting in those bottles, coming into contact with the plastic in those bottles for a long time. Also, you never know about the environment that water is sitting in, how hot it gets sitting in those container ships, in those warehouses, those kinds of things. Definitely something to consider when thinking about getting bottled water for your family. And there's another huge environmental problem about the water being bottled and being shipped, especially from Europe to North America, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Next up, we have Icelandic glacial water. So this one comes from, you guessed it, Iceland. It says it's from the legendary 5,000-year-old Olfa Spring. This pristine natural spring water is filtered through ancient lava rock, creating remarkable purity and optimal mineral balance. So they say it has a naturally high pH of 8.4, so if you're looking for alkaline water, this is a good choice. We tested it as 8.0, but it's pretty close. The TDS tested at 52 parts per million, which is very low for spring water, and the hardness, 17 parts per million. So one of the things that makes Icelandic water somewhat unique is that their high pH and their alkalinity in their water is naturally occurring, because as the water is filtered through lava rock, it raises the pH and it also raises the TDS content of the water, but only marginally. So when you check out the label on the Icelandic water, you can see it's a much cleaner label, especially when compared to Fiji water. So as you can see, for example, bicarbonate's 33, calcium is only 6, magnesium only 2, chlorides is 12, a bit of potassium at 1, there's sodium at 11 parts per million, and you can see sulfates 3. But again, similar concerns, the amount of time that it takes to bottle it, to get it into your hands, it's a long time. Next up we have Voss, which is artesian or spring water, which comes from the pristine wilderness of southern Norway. Sounds pretty fancy, doesn't it? Voss water boasts as an extremely low TDS, total dissolved solids. They say it's around 40 parts per million, but actually we measured it at only 23 parts per million. Voss water tested at extremely low 5.0 pH, which means that Voss water is the most acidic water here. Their website says that Voss water is certified as kosher, in case that's important to you too. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is an actor and former wrestler who promotes the Voss water bottle brand. The Rock is more than just a promoter that's on a brand deal. He actually owns a piece of the company, which is why he promotes the brand. Although in his promotional material, I found it odd that he doesn't talk at all about the taste of the water, he just talks about where it comes from and why it's significant. And of course, we got the same concerns about shipping that water all the way from southern Norway to you. So for Voss water, again, you can see that the label is quite clean. Now we know there's 23 parts per million in there, but the label doesn't really give us any clue of what makes up that 23 parts per million. So like I say, it's a very clean label, a little suspicious though. So next up we have Evian water. So if you look at the label, it says Evian, made by the French Alps, and it also says natural electrolytes. A little bit of new information there. We tested the pH of Evian water at 8.0, which makes it alkaline water. We also tested the total dissolved solids at 283 parts per million, which is quite high. And the hardness at 136 parts per million was among the highest of the bunch. This stuff will definitely clog your Keurig. Their label and website states that they've got 6.5 parts per million of sodium content. So if your family's on a sodium-reduced diet, this definitely isn't the right water for you. In fact, truth be told, many communities have tap water with similar specifications, although their pH typically wouldn't be quite that high. American and Pirelli calendar model Gigi Hadid is a big fan of Evian water. She says she shares the same health philosophy as the brand. According to their website, Evian is partnering with the Paris fashion house Balmain and their creative director Olivier Rousteing, and they're designing a limited edition 700 milliliter glass bottle with Evian water and Balmain's signature gold lettering and a lot of other cool graphics. No word whatsoever about whether the water is going to be any different. So when we look at the Evian label, you can see that there's a lot of stuff in this water. So calcium at 80, magnesium 26 parts per million. We can see that there's the salt we talked about already at 6.5, potassium at 1, bicarbonate 360, sulfates at 14, chlorides at 10, nitrates at 1, and we have silicon at 15. First time we've had silicone in any of these waters, and fluorides at 0.1. So again, we got the same concerns about this water being bottled in the French Alps and being shipped all the way to you here, as we mentioned earlier. Now, one of the things that's different on the label here, it says natural electrolytes. What are electrolytes? Electrolytes are minerals that carry an electric charge. So they're vital to the operation of our bodies. They're contained within our blood, within our urine, and within our sweat. Common electrolytes are sodium, potassium, magnesium, bicarbonates, and sulfates. So how do we get electrolytes? Well, 97% comes from a balanced diet in the foods that we eat. Now, most of that comes from sodium. Now, in North America, there's lots of sodium in our diet, so we definitely don't need to add more in our water. Chlorides are found in table salt. Potassium is in fruits, like bananas, avocados, and sweet potatoes. Other common foods with electrolytes are beans, potatoes, fish, milk, and nuts. I've put a link from Healthline in the description down below that gives you a list of 25 sources of electrolytes. Calcium is found in dairy products and orange juice. In fact, an 8-ounce glass of orange juice will give you 30% of your daily intake requirement in calcium. All right, let's do a quick comparison of the spring water that we've touched on so far. So you can see when we compare Fiji, Icelandic, Voss, and Evian, the pH is all fairly high. It's on the alkaline side, except for Voss, you can see it's quite acidic. The total dissolved solids, you can see there's quite a range. Voss is the lowest at 23 parts per million, and Evian is the highest at 283. Hardness, again, you can see Voss is 0, which makes sense. The water is soft, and it ranges up to Evian at 136 parts per million. And the cost, you can see again, it's all over the board. Fiji is, medium cost, let's say. None of these bottles of water are cheap, but Voss, Icelandic are the highest, and Evian kind of in between. Next up, we have Perrier Water. So Perrier Water is carbonated natural spring water. So they've taken the spring water and they put bubbles into it. So their website says that they've been bottling this product for over 150 years and that lots of folks enjoy the natural taste and the carbonation in the water. Their website says they're originating in France and their effervescent spirit is known worldwide. Although this water has a low pH of 5.0, it has a high TDS of 260 parts per million, which definitely makes it a mineral water. And again, the same concern about shipping this water all the way from France to North America. And when looking at the Perrier label, you can see why the TDS, or the total dissolved solids, is so high. You can see there's magnesium in there. You can see there's sulfates in there, chloride is in there, high sodium content at almost 10 parts per million. And you can see the bicarbonate is super high, again, because they put those bubbles in there to make it fizzy water. So next up is flow water. So I guess this isn't technically bottled water because they classify this as a box. So this is, I guess, boxed water. But anyway, it's natural spring water, but the big difference between this spring water and the other ones we talked about so far is this one comes from North America. So the pH is 8.0, the TDS is 286 parts per million, so it's fairly high in mineral content, which again makes this mineral water and full of electrolytes. And the hardness, again, definitely on the high side at 85 parts per million. Now their packaging is definitely unique. They're trying to get away from those concerns about those plastic bottled water. So they say it's 100% recyclable and 68 to 75% renewable. And the cap is plant-based. Now if you crave alkaline water and you believe in the merits of the packaging, this one might be a good choice for your family. And as you can see, there's very little information on that label, what makes up that 286 parts per million of total dissolved solids. So your guess is as good as mine. I'm thinking sodium. Next up, liquid death. So as you can see, this, I guess, technically isn't bottled water. Now we've got canned water. So is this basically just spring water that comes from a spring that's been put into a can to make it look like a beer can? Yep, that's exactly what it is. The Liquid Death website tells us that Liquid Death water comes from an underground mountain water source that's protected by a couple hundred feet of stone. And the water's tapped straight from the source into these airtight cans. They also claim that it goes through a fancy purification process that 100% maintains the chemical profile of the water straight as it comes from that mountain water source. Now I'm thinking it probably goes through a carbon filter and an ultraviolet disinfection system to make sure the water's odor and bacteria free. And as you can see, there's a little bit of different information on the can here. So they tell you that it's bottled at Frankenmart in Austria. It also tells us that the cans contain 23 times more recycled content than plastic bottles. So again, they're differentiating themselves from those plastic bottles. Liquid Death promotes itself with international rapper Wiz Khalifa, who says it's great bong water. He went on Instagram showing Liquid Death water being poured into his bong before smoking. And if you go onto their website, you'll see videos and other content that supports that kind of a lifestyle. And again, no one mentions anything about the taste of the water or whether it's good for you or not. So as you probably guessed by now, it's just a unique marketing ploy of putting spring water in a tall boy beer can. I could definitely see why Nicole Kidman doesn't promote this brand. Next up, we've got Nestle Pure Life Spring Water. Now, one thing you'll notice is it doesn't actually say Nestle on here. Now, there's been a lot of controversy the last few years about Nestle sucking water out of the ground and depleting some aquifers in British Columbia and in Ontario in Canada. So there's been a lot of controversy also coming about where this water actually comes from right now. And that may be why it doesn't say Nestle on this bottle. So when we look at the Nestle Pure Life Spring Water label, you can see there's not a whole lot of information here. All it's telling us is a whole bunch of zeros. It says sodium 25 milligrams, and that's per 500 milliliters of water. So that's a lot of salt in there. It tells us calcium at 50 milligrams, but it doesn't tell us much other than it just says ingredients, spring water, and ozone, which means that they've gas flushed it through ozone to make sure that it's bacteria free. But let's see what we tested it as. On their website, it shows different amounts of pH that they've tested it for. It depends on the source where it's coming from. One shows 7.8 pH, the other shows 6.5, which is quite a difference. Now, we tested Nestle Pure Life spring water with a pH of 7.5, but it had a super high 516 parts per million total dissolved solids. Yes, you can definitely call this mineral water, but that 516 parts per million is definitely higher than the 500 parts per million that's recommended by the EPA as drinking water. At 153 parts per million of hardness, this water is hard. Don't even think about using this in your Keurig. And when you drink this water, you'll notice how thick or how dense it feels. And that's because of that super high mineral content in that water. But Pure Life spring water is the cheapest of the bunch. And given all the controversy, no celebrities endorse this product. I sure wouldn't. And I'm sure there's not enough money in the world to get The Rock to drink this stuff. When comparing these four water brands, you can see that, again, there's a huge difference. pH, Perrier's the lowest of 5.0, Flow and Liquid Death are the highest at 8.0, the Nestle's somewhere in between. The parts per million, again, you can see these are all very much on the high side, ranging from Liquid Death of 212 parts per million up to that crazy number of 516 parts per million of the Nestle water. The hardness, again, they're all fairly hard, and they're all going to cause problem if you use them in your Keurig, as I mentioned before. But again, you can see there's a big difference in cost. The Flow and the Nestle are fairly low in cost, while the Perrier and the Liquid Death are somewhere in between. Again, Perrier being the higher one. Again, that panache of the French Alps in there makes them feel they can justify the higher cost. So next up, we're talking about reverse osmosis water. What's reverse osmosis? It's water that's being forced through a membrane. So under pressure, it's being forced through. The low mineral content water goes through the membrane. The high mineral content water is used to flush that membrane and to keep it clean. And that low mineral content water is what's being bottled. And if you're looking for more information about how reverse osmosis actually works, I've got a great YouTube video. I'll put a link in the description down below. And if you're concerned about some of the myths and miscommunications, which is super hard to say about reverse osmosis, again, I've got a great YouTube video that explains it all. And again, I got a link in the description down below. So first up is Aquafina reverse osmosis water, which is owned by Pepsi. So they take municipal water, they process it through the reverse osmosis process, they get rid of the impurities, and they make sure that it's bacteria and chemical free, and bottle it. We tested Aquafina water at 1 part per million TDS and a slightly acidic pH of 6.5. Aquafina water is soft, tastes clean and fresh, and you'll notice the difference. It tastes very thin, and that's the difference because the TDS is so much lower than some of those spring waters we talked about earlier. Gillian Smith, fashion director for New York Fashion Week, says she stays hydrated while working by drinking Aquafina water. And as you can see on the label, there's very little information because there's only 1 measly part per million of mineral content. So next up is Dasani water, which is owned by, you guessed it, Coca-Cola. So they have reverse osmosis water that's been remineralized. In other words, they put the water through the reverse osmosis process, and then they've added some minerals back into the water. So what do they add into the water to remineralize it? Well, they add magnesium sulfate, potassium chloride, and salt. They say that's what gives Dasani its unique taste and health benefits. Now, we know that adding salt to food makes it taste better, but I've never heard of adding salt as a health benefit. Now, we tested Dasani water at a higher 28 part per million of TDS, and that's likely because of the stuff they've added back into the water. And it had a slightly more acidic pH of 6.1 compared to the Aquafina. And it was soft and tastes basically clean and fresh. And similarly, it has a medium price, just like the Aquafina water. And Dasani's provided us with some information on its label about what's actually in the water, so you can see that the total dissolved solids is less than 35 parts per million, and it can also see that it's reverse osmosis water, it's non-carbonated, but they don't tell us what that 35 parts per million is made up of exactly. Ardo Life water is another reverse osmosis water that's been remineralized. It's been remineralized to neutralize the pH. Usually they add calcium to do that, and it also has some electrolytes added to improve the taste. We tested Ardo Life water, 23 parts per million total dissolved solids, a neutral pH of 7.0, and a hardness of only 17 parts per million. Now, one thing that definitely differentiates this water from the rest is the gorgeous artwork on the bottle. Now, the water itself, yeah, it has a neutral pH for reverse osmosis water. Yeah, it's slightly remineralized, but other than that, pretty much the same old stuff. And Ardo Life Water has a very unique way of showing their ingredients on their bottle. And although their mineral content is very low, they've chosen to show them to us. So as you can see, bicarbonate's fairly high at 11, calcium's quite low at 0.1 parts per million, magnesium, again, also low, 1.8. There is some potassium in there, one of the highest of the bottled water that we've tested here today at 7.1. Sodium, very low, and again, you can see the sulfate, 7.4. Now, one of the samples I couldn't get a sample of was boxed water. Now, in Canada, they only showed one place that sold it. We drove there, they didn't have any. Yeah, they offered to ship it to us, but it was going to be a $50 shipping fee, so we passed. So basically, it's reverse osmosis water that's basically in what looks like a milk carton. And they say it's a renewable resource. They say it's 100% recyclable. So again, they're looking at a unique way of getting rid of plastic bottled water waste and impact on the environment. Taking the information from the boxed water website, it says that their pH is 6.4, so it is acidic like most reverse osmosis waters are, and the mineral content is only 2 parts per million. So basically it's reverse osmosis water in what looks like a milk carton. But it definitely is a way to minimize the environmental impact of all those wasted plastic water bottles. Keke Palmer, an American actress, singer, and TV personality, has been singing the praises of boxed water and talking about how environmentally conscious their product actually is. Funny though, again, she doesn't talk anything about the great taste or how she enjoys it or how her friends enjoy it. So when we do a comparison of the reverse osmosis waters, we see that when it comes to pH, Dasani is the lowest, Ardo Life Water is the highest of the reverse osmosis ones, and that's because they've remineralized the water, usually adding calcium to increase the pH. Total dissolved solids range from 1 for Aquafina and around 1 or 2 for boxed water, up to the remineralized waters are 23, 28. Hardness, Dasani basically came in at 1, Aquafina was 0, boxed water, I'm sure it would be 0 also. Again, the Ardo Life, because they've added calcium to the water, that's an element of hardness, it brings it up slightly, and you can see the cost. Boxed water was definitely the highest, the other 3 were about the same cost. Next up, we've got Smart Water. So Smart Water is vapor distilled water. So the distillation process, basically how that works is water is boiled, and then the condensation that collects, you can collect it, by putting a piece of metal above it or whatever. The condensation collects on the surface, runs down, and that water is distilled water. So it's a very, very pure water, very low in mineral content, usually 0 parts per million of mineral content. Generally speaking, distilled water tastes awful because there's absolutely nothing in it whatsoever to give it any taste. So from their website, Smart Water says that it's distilled British spring water that's had electrolytes added for taste. Interestingly enough, the parent company of Smart Water is owned by Coca-Cola, which means the same company that owns Dasani also owns Smart Water. And when we look at the Smart Water label, you can see a little bit of information, but not a whole lot. As you read down lower, you can see ingredients: vapor distilled water, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, potassium bicarbonate, and ozone. Smart Water has a pH level of 6.5, total dissolved solids of 25 parts per million, and it's super soft at a hardness of 1. They say that electrolytes are added to improve the taste, but because the TDS is so low, there can't be a whole lot. Zendaya, a global actress, has been named as Smart Water's global brand ambassador. She says, and I quote, "I'm proud to work with a brand that encourages those in pursuit of something smarter and shares a vision of universal access to safe and clean water." Zendaya goes on to say, "When I'm on a set, backstage, or in between meetings, Smart Water helps me stay hydrated and keep it smart." See what she did there? Curious though why she doesn't say anything but why she prefers this brand of bottled water to any other brand of bottled water. But then that seems to be the case with all of the bottled water influencers, doesn't it? This is basically just remineralized distilled water in a nice looking bottle. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to the environmental impact of boxed, canned, or bottled water. What no one ever talks about is the environmental impact and carbon footprint of shipping all that bottled water. Remember, it's heavy, it's in large containers, and it needs to be shipped. So whether it's being shipped by truck, it's being shipped by a cargo ship across the ocean, there's a huge environmental impact. I wonder what The Rock thinks about that. So what kind of water do I and my family drink when we're at home and work? We drink reverse osmosis water, but we don't drink bottled water. We have our own reverse osmosis drinking water system. So we take our tap water and we further purify it through a reverse osmosis drinking water system, and we have one faucet at the kitchen sink that we use to fill up our bottles, and we also have that connected to a water line that goes into our fridge so that we can get cold water from our fridge And also our ice cubes are made with delicious reverse osmosis drinking water. And if you prefer alkaline water as opposed to reverse osmosis water, you can always remineralize that reverse osmosis water just by adding a filter, so that as the water heads through your faucet, it's been remineralized and it's good to go. And if you'd like to get some more information about a reverse osmosis drinking water system for your family, you can go to our websites, either waterestore.com in the US, waterestore.ca in Canada. We offer free shipping and discount pricing. Not only is reverse osmosis great tasting drinking water, the process also removes all the pharmaceuticals and personal care products from the water. It removes 90% of the mineral content, including lead, sodium, and arsenic. It removes bacteria and viruses from your water, and chemicals like chlorine, chloramines, herbicides, and pesticides. And if we do a quick comparison of home reverse osmosis water compared to city, river, or rainwater, you can see again the home reverse osmosis water is again very similar to rain or river or lake water. The total dissolved solids is low, again, like rain, and relatively low like river or lake water, much lower than city water, and the hardness in parts per million is basically 0. So again, you don't have to worry about that Keurig. And whenever we're traveling or on vacation, we can always find a great source of reverse osmosis bottled water. Click here for your next video on reverse osmosis drinking water systems, and I'll see you there. Any questions or comments? Add them down below.